Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are. Mary Hunt here at Water with Diane New and Joe Cinto. We're all working hard at the Water office. We are delighted that you're with us. I want to make a special welcome to those who are new to Water events, especially new to the tea format, which we developed due to COVID and people expressing a need for more community. Little did we know a war was soon to follow. Water also offers a meditation, a liturgy, and a book talk during most months. We found that these kinds of programs have their own logic and their own beauty, but that the hybrid tea format allows us to focus on issues of common interest and concern in a more personal, sometimes informal way, but with the same rigor and commitment. We at Water acknowledge that we are all on Indigenous land. Here in Silver Spring, Maryland, where Water is located, is the traditional and contemporary land of the Piscataway and Anacostan peoples. We acknowledge the trauma for them that is deeply embedded in the foundation of this country. We recognize the deep historical, spiritual, and personal trauma that has harmed Indigenous communities, communities of color, as well as immigrants and other people in this country. Water's programs are aimed at supporting and igniting social change. Whether in feminist theology, ethics, or ritual, Water's efforts are geared to bring together solid intellectual data with the feminist, activist, and spiritual commitments of our alliance. That would be you. Happy International Women's Day, though this is not a happy day in world history as war rages in Ukraine and injustices reign elsewhere. But we at Water use this special day to rededicate ourselves as women of peace and as people of peace. Ours is not some fluffy, soft touch, Hallmark card version of peace, but the hard work that goes into making new choices about demilitarizing the world, as many people have declared necessary over decades, and we have not listened to them. We are not naive about the geopolitics, but we are clear about the fact that war solves nothing. The toll on humans and Earth is simply too high to pay. With nuclear weapons and mutually assured destruction in the balance, diplomacy and compromise seem the only options. So today we gather to support one another in our peace efforts and to stand in a symbolic way in solidarity with our siblings in Ukraine as well as in Russia. It's fitting that we have an international group gathered here. I think we are representing at least 7 or 8 countries, if not more, and we thank each one of you for being here. Special thanks, as I said earlier, to Laura Carprice in Ottawa, who's handling the technical aspects of our call. Let me then review our agenda before we begin. We're going to start with some music from a Ukrainian group here in the US. Then we will have 3 speakers who will offer the very briefest remarks, and we will intersperse their remarks with time to reflect, and we'll use some Ukrainian art for our reflection. Then we'll have small group conversations to share your wisdom so you can talk with each other. There'll be some plenary sharing after that. We'll close out with a blessing and a Ukrainian women's singing group that will send us on our way. The Zoom will stay on for conversation after that. Please feel free to use the chat. Put resources in the chat that you think would be useful for all of us, whether links to other groups or to publications or to ideas you have. And we always, after these sessions, send out notes, and we'll include the materials in the chat in those notes that we will send to you for your sharing. This and all Water programs are available at our website, www.waterwomensalliance.org. And we encourage you to share with your friends and communities all of the Water programs. Water programs are free and they are open to everyone without charge. We need and we appreciate donations for those who can give, and many do, and they give very generously. All are welcome, regardless of ability to collaborate financially. At Water, it is our belief that if we share, but only if we share, together, there's enough. If we share, together, there's enough. I want to pay special thanks to the Elaine Donaldson Program Fund for assistance on this season's programs. Again, welcome. And now enjoy a bit of Bandura music, a piece entitled The Girls Are Plowing, played by the Women's Bandura Ensemble here in the US, A bandura, if you don't know, is a plucked string instrument located somewhere between a zither and a lute, and it is played in Ukraine. And these women, I believe from Minnesota, are playing their banduras. Please enjoy. Wasn't that a lovely way to begin? We thank these women for their beautiful music. The girls are plowing. I turn now to the three women I have invited to join us because of their wisdom. As I told them in a note, we do not expect you to solve the war in Ukraine. Just offer a bit of insight, some wisdom, or some hope as we move along together through this terrible chapter in world history. I hope their remarks will be springboards for our own thinking. I'll introduce each one when it's her time to speak. Our first speaker is the internationally respected feminist, Peggy Antrobus. She says of herself, she thinks of herself as a Caribbean woman, born in Grenada, educated in St. Lucia and St. Vincent. She worked in St. Lucia, Jamaica, Barbados, and has family in Trinidad. Yes, a Caribbean woman you are. Since 1974, she has worked for the advancement of women's rights and development in many spaces, nationally, regionally, and internationally. She's a founding member of the network of Third World Feminists promoting development alternatives with women for a new era. Many of you have heard of DAWN, Development Alternatives for Women in a New Era. Although she's worked with governments, international organizations, and NGOs, Peggy writes that she feels that only feminist-led women's movements can catalyze the changes necessary for a more just, humane, peaceful, and environmentally sustainable world. Any wonder why we invited her? Her 2004 book, The Global Women's Movement, Origins, Issues, and Strategies, is a classic in the field, still used in a number of classes. I have known of Peggy Antrobus from people like Charlotte Bunch and friends at the Center of Concern, but it was through the good graces of her friend and mine, Rosemary Ganley from Peterborough, Ontario, that we are able to welcome you, Peggy, with delight. Thank you for being with us. We are in your capable hands for a brief 3-minute input on the question of insight, wisdom, encouragement in this time of war. Thank you for gracing us with your presence.
Thank you very much, Mary. When you asked me to speak on Women's Quest for Peace, remember I told you that I don't know much about that, and we agreed that none of us knows what to say. But I remembered that when I was writing my book in 2001 actually, we were in the middle of the Iraq War. And when I was finishing it, we were at the point at which there were protests against President Aristide in Haiti. And so those two wars, I recall what was against Aristide a war, were bookends to my book. And I thought, something I wrote there probably will serve its purpose now. And in fact, I'm just going to read a very short paragraph because it could be written for now. So it says, the present crisis throws into relief the connections between sexism, racism, and imperialism. It urgently requires dialogue between those who seek global justice. Haiti and Iraq remind us that the greatest contribution a global women's movement might make is to take leadership in addressing sexism and racism in its own ranks. Unknown caller. Women everywhere to do so. The reason I chose that, and I make that point, was because when I thought about Iraq and Haiti, in both cases, there were massive mobilizations against the war and against Aristide. So in the case of the war in Iraq, I think there was the largest demonstration ever, over 1 million people in London against the war, and it didn't stop the war. In Haiti, there was a small group of Haitian women who were against Aristide and who built a coalition against President Aristide, and they succeeded. The Americans came and took Aristide out of Cuba. For those who don't know, Haiti rather, for those who don't know, Aristide was a former priest and was the first leader that had come from the people and was working for the people. And I thought, what those two mobilizations show is that when you mobilize against the status quo and when you challenge particularly corporate interests, you will never succeed. It doesn't matter if you have 1 million people plus. But when you organize in a way that, in fact, serves the purposes of the status quo, as in getting rid of Aristide from this little island, this poverty-stricken island of Haiti, then you succeed. And so that is why I have these 4 points that I really want to emphasize. The first one is that Women's Quest for Peace requires feminist organizing around, first of all, addressing sexism, homophobia, and racism in our own ranks. And I think that intersectoral analysis and consciousness raising might help. The second thing is a feminist analysis of the political economy of war, understanding the links between sexism, racism, and imperialism is essential. The third thing is that strategizing requires regarding coalition building and alliance building, because we need to recognize that there are many different struggles for justice. Some of them focus on the environment, some of them poverty, some violence against women, but in fact, it's one struggle, the struggle for justice, because these things are all connected and the need to work together. And finally, that communication methods, including the use of arts and culture, is a very important part of that mobilization. And I want to end by reading from a piece by Audre Lorde, which I think just captures it so beautifully. And Audre Lorde wrote, "We have chosen each other, and the edges of each other's battles. The war is the same. If we lose, someday women's blood will congeal upon a dead planet. If we win, there's no telling. We seek beyond history for a new and more possible meaning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll ponder your words for a moment, looking at one of the embroideries from Ukraine. We'll take a moment of silence.
Ukrainian folk art features goddess figures in woven and embroidered clothing, ritual textiles, pottery, painting, and Pysanky decorated Easter eggs. Let's take a minute of quiet reflection on this beautiful piece of folk art by the Ukrainian women.
Thank you again to Peggy Antrobus for insightful words, and also from this powerful quote from Audre Lorde. And thank you to the Ukrainian artists for this beautiful piece we've just had the pleasure of reflecting upon. We turn now to the Reverend Dr. Ann-Cathrin Jarl, a Swedish Lutheran priest, a retired theological ethicist in Uppsala, Sweden. Ann-Cathrin, whom I have known and loved since 1974, has long struggled for peace, connected with European groups as well as the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and as part of the Swedish Lutheran Church. She wrote a very important book called In/Justice, Women and Global Economics, which opened many eyes to how providing basic human needs could make a world of difference, literally. Sweden's status as a European country that is related to but not a member of NATO, and Sweden having a proud history of peace efforts, Sweden gives Ann-Cathrin a unique and valuable perspective on this war. Ann-Cathrin, 1,000 welcomes. Please unmute your phone, Ann-Cathrin, please unmute. Please unmute your phone.
Okay.
There you go. Thank you. Fine. Welcome.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation about the Russian attack on Ukraine from air, sea, and ground. The intense and very aggressive, unprovoked, and very violent attack by the Russian leaders against the Ukrainian people, where women, children, and civilians are targeted. And the refugees are now estimated as of today to maybe up to as many as 2 million people. The entire Ukraine has 43 million people. We stand in awe of the Ukrainian people and their fierce resistance of freedom, for freedom, democracy, human rights, equality, international law, and the UN Charter. We are still to realize the importance of learning as a means to achieve peace in the world and here in Europe. As you might be aware, all of us up here are nervous about the war that is going on because we don't know its aim, its cause, who will stop it and how it will stop, and where we will be when that day happens. To see the little children and their young mothers trying to make it over the border to Poland and many other countries in Europe where they are welcomed, but they don't have, as I have thought about many times, they don't have water, they don't have food, they have no place of their own. It has been distracted by the attacks from Russia on the country. The very intense and aggressive war that is unprovoked and very violent attack by the Russian leadership against the Ukrainian people, where women, children, and civilians are targeted. We stand in awe of the Ukrainian people who stand up against the invader and the fierce defense of freedom, democracy, human rights, equality, international law, and the UN Charter. You remember the old slogan, "A people united will never be defeated." The president of Ukraine, Zelensky, is both showing leadership of a rare kind and is applying for sainthood, while he himself is pleading for help of all kinds from all of us. And NATO is spending a lot of money on their armament, and even Sweden has sent arms to Ukraine, but only for defending themselves. They want to be the leadership in Ukraine want to have more and more intense tools to defend their country, which is impossible when we have no clue. We don't know what it is, and it's not in the head of the leadership of Russia. And even though the networks are sending to Russian people that they don't regard the Russian people as enemies, but want to know how to solve this conflict. And we are waiting for having any kind of clue what negotiation would look like. The military-industrial complex is having a heyday, skyrocketing on the financial markets, and of course support more and more violence. This will be analyzed in the upcoming comparison with how the civil society from the entire globe is spending material to support Ukraine. This includes peace movements, the Red Cross, and a multitude of organizations, women movements, churches, all kinds of religious movements. And we don't learn from history. History books are not read anymore, or maybe not even printed. Doctors Without Borders are also very intense on the ground in Ukraine. Up north in Europe, there is the two small countries, Sweden and Finland. And they are non-aligned. which have put them in a particular situation in regard to the defense system that is organized within NATO. And they are, of course, not going to come in and help the people to be on the ground and defend the people or make them come back. We are spending a lot of hopes on the stalling of the Russian war machine. But since they are alone, the Ukrainian people are alone on the ground, and we are all afraid, actually. We are also not that far from nuclear weapons, except I refuse to think about it, however you do that.
Thank you very much, Ann-Cathrin.
Thank you.
I know it's difficult to be where you are, and I know that the uncertainty about which you speak is very helpful for us to reflect on. You give us a good perspective from Scandinavia. Let us turn to one more slide of Ukrainian art to let your thoughts sink in and to begin to focus our own.
A ruchnik is a long, narrow ritual cloth used in many traditional ceremonies, particularly births, baptisms, weddings, and funerals. It's also draped over icons to honor them.
Thank you, Ann-Cathrin, Jarl from Sweden, and thank you to the person who made this beautiful ritual cloth. The notion that it's used for birthing gives me some hope today. We now turn to our last speaker, Sophie J. Welcome to you, Sophie. Sophie's a graduate student at Columbia University, School of International and Public Affairs. She's studying international security policy with a specialization in international organizations and UN studies. To that end, she's a member of the United Nations team of Pax Christi International. She comes to us through the good offices of Mary Jelinek, who, like Rosemary Ganley, knows so many good people doing so much good work. Mary is the part of that delegation of Pax Christi International to the UN. We're happy to have your views, Sophie, as a student of these questions with your fresh perspective. Many welcomes to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I think I'm going to kind of discuss the more political side of this. That's my background. And coming as a woman in security policy, I think it's very important to note that a lot of these policies and a lot of these discussions, there are not a lot of women present. And especially within my graduate program as well, you can see that. And many of the professors are men. And I think that there's a feminist voice missing from this conversation. And I believe that if we had more women leaders and more women who are on top of these policies, there would have been a much different outcome. But to that end, talking about the political situation now, there are some things that are happening that I think can give us a little bit of hope. I want to primarily focus on the UN General Assembly. This past weekend, they just passed a resolution that 141 countries agreed upon to condemn the situation and condemn the Russian invasion. And although there can be some argument as to whether there's any tactile impact on this resolution, I think that the show of strength and the show of support is significant and sends a message, particularly to Putin. Having just 40 countries that abstained or voted against shows the strong international support for Ukraine and hopefully sends a message to both Ukrainians and Russians as to the international community's view on the situation. That being said, I want to focus on the refugee crisis there as well. Currently, as our previous speakers have mentioned, there are approximately 2 million Ukrainian refugees all over the world. But one thing to note is we are experiencing some racism on the border. There are a lot of African refugees who are trying to escape Ukraine that are experiencing a lot of racism and are unable to leave the country. And to that end, I want us to be aware of the fact that while this Ukrainian refugee crisis is happening, there are also crises all over the world, not in Europe, that are also occurring, particularly with Afghanistan women. I had the pleasure to speak to some Afghanistan women refugees last week, and their stories and insight, they're deeply concerned that this crisis will draw attention away from Afghanistan and other countries that are experiencing crises currently and need help as well. So while this crisis is devastating and we need to pay attention, I think it's also important to remember that just because it's not happening in Europe doesn't mean it's not happening, and it's important to be aware of these things as they go on as well. One other note, I would like to discuss the issue of sanctions. And when we're talking about dialogue and diplomatic measures, sanctions are often seen as a forceful, although non-military action. And that is true. And the sanctions that are currently being passed on Russia are some of the strictest we've seen in a very long time. And while I believe that currently this is the only policy that the leaders are able to implement in a strong, firm, non-military way, I think we also need to be aware of the impact of these sanctions on the civilians within Russia who had no control over this war. And I don't have an answer to how we deal with that. And I think it's a very, very difficult policy question, but although this is not necessarily military, there could still be impacts on the civilians and citizens within the country. Just this morning, President Biden announced that he is banning the import of Russian oil and gas into the United States. This is a very strong measure that I think will harm Russia, but perhaps only in the long term. And so the question becomes what can be done in the short term, as sanctions are often seen as a measure that will see the effects over a long period of time. And based on Putin's actions right now, he's not very much concerned with the long term. And so the question becomes, what can we do now to prevent him from going further and prevent him from harming more and more Ukrainians and potentially other people all over the world? Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie J. Very much appreciate your perspective, and I note how it dovetails with the other two very much. It goes right back to what Peggy said at the beginning, that there's women need to be involved in this, and women-led groups need to be involved in what Ann-Cathrin said with regard to the question of how we move through this problem from the European perspective, as well as how the Russian people, who, as you say, have no real say in how this happens, how we support them as well. So thank you for your good insights, and so happy to have you and your generation taking these issues on in such a competent way. So thank you. We could finally go to our last bit of Ukrainian art for 1 minute of silence, and then we'll move into our small groups.
The goddess often appears in the Rushnik either as a recognizable figure or in the more abstract floral form. of the tree of life.
Thank you very much to our speakers, and thank you to the artist of the Tree of Life. We now take an opportunity to move into small groups just for 12, 15 minutes to have an opportunity to meet one another and to ask the question really as we move into these groups to introduce yourself and try to say how you and your community are deepening your feminist commitments to peace. What are you doing on the ground where you are? We had the opportunity, Diane and I, on the weekend to go to a peace demonstration that was put on by one of the local churches, including the Hyattsville Mennonite Church. I think Cindy Lapp is with us, one of the pastors who put on that lovely peace demonstration. What are you doing? And what are the ways that you and your community are sustaining your feminist commitments to peace at a time when they're being tested all over the world? So that's the question. And we will go into the groups thanks to Laura's magic work here. You just sit tight, you'll be put in a group, and then when the time is up, you'll be brought out of the group back to the plenary for our plenary discussion. Thank you. Enjoy your groups. Hello, this seems to be group one. Laura, is that right? Or are we the ones that are left over?
I
Can
think
you send us again? Because I didn't, I got the thing, but I wasn't able to press. I think that happened to a few of us.
Okay, let me see what I can do here.
Nice to see you. Or we can make a group of our own. Just reassign us or.
Yeah, give me a second. Sorry.
And then you can have the groups for 12 minutes and then we'll come back, okay?
Yeah,
Great.
sorry, I'm just struggling to move people
Take your
to other rooms.
Take your time.
Ann-Cathrin, are you able to click on the breakout room? How about you, Abigail and Mariella? Are you able to join?
I'm driving, so I'm not going to, I've just been listening.
Okay,
All
no
right, I'm a
worries.
little concerned
Welcome.
to try and do it that much attention, okay?
Yeah,
Thank you, sorry.
no worries. Ann-Cathrin, are you able to join the room? One second, I can't hear you. Let me see if I can unmute you here. There we go.
Hi.
Hi, I can hear you now. Would you like to join a breakout room? Were you able to join?
No, I haven't been in a room 5 I was supposed to go into, I think.
Okay, let me see if I can send you there.
Send me to room 5.
Okay, I'll send the button and then you'll just click join.
Sorry?
You just have to click the join group button.
Thanks, everybody. I hope your small group was as at least as comforting, if not challenging as mine. And I hope that you got some good ideas. Be so kind as to put those in the chat. Would you please? We're not going to have a chance. We're not going to have time. Just if we keep with our schedule, we're not going to have time to hear all of those. But just put any salient ones in the chat and we will get them out to you in the next day or two when we send out the notes. Again, I want to thank our speakers and I want to turn to you opening the floor. The reactions button on the bottom right-hand side of your screen includes a raise hand. You see I've now raised my hand. If you'll do that, we'll just take a few people to raise their hands and make comments. Again, our thanks to Laura Carprice for handling the tech on this. And please go ahead. We'll just hear a couple of things from people. We just say your name and perhaps where you're from and maybe one short insight that you want to highlight. And if yours has been said, please hold it in your heart. I see some good things going in the chat. We'll begin, as I say, we'll copy the chat. So the floor is open. We'll take just a few minutes to hear from people in this somewhat overwhelming situation. You know, lots of good intentions, lots of tears, lots of frustration. But now let's, you know, how can we resource each other in very concrete ways? The floor is open. Kitty puts in the chat, Kitty from Nicaragua puts in the chat that we need to acknowledge and work against the power of the military industrial complex. That was something Ann-Cathrin mentioned. Who's up? Peggy, are you wanting to raise your hand? Go ahead, please.
No, I just want to encourage Susan to share with all of us what she shared with the small group that I was in about the 2 demonstrations in Cambridge, in Boston recently. Susan, could you say something about that?
Yes, on Sunday, there was a peace demonstration. There were 2 demonstrations. One was with Code Pink organizers and Mass Peace Action, and speakers highlighted how the history has been of armaments and aggression, and focused on solutions that were based on military action. Meanwhile, another demonstration was going on, attended by more people, on how to help the Ukrainians and to, you know, the suffering, and people were calling for NATO to come in and you know, do more military action. And so it really is an ongoing need, I think, to teach history to the younger generation about how we get into these terrible situations, and that there are answers, there are alternatives to military and those kind of conflicts, but we need to be in it for the long term and form coalitions. All these groups need to, you know, find each other and be more focused on this. So it's work ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much. 3 quick things from the chat. One is take a look at Peggy Antrobus's book, which is unfortunately not out of date, written in 2004, unfortunately not out of date, but very relevant. Also look at the work of Jen Vaughn and the maternal gift economy. That work is really, I think, some very important work being done to help us think anew. And Mary Condren, the third thing is Mary Condren will be giving a lecture tomorrow on religions of empire. I'm sorry, on Thursday on religions of empire. It's not an open lecture, but at least having word of it, Mary, might help to encourage people to look at your work on religions of empire. Teresa Stawawe, you'd be next. Feel free again to put stuff in the chat.
I just want to say how I stand in awe of women. I am in something called Women in Conversation in Berkeley. And you know, how quickly women contact each other, and we together value what each of us has to say, and I want to deepen that in all of the associations of women.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you very much, Teresa Stowawe, Loretto co-member. Anybody else? Mary Jelinek, I think we'll give you the last word. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this with our closing blessing and the short musical piece. And then we're going to continue in Zoom conversation for those who wish to stay. I just want to honor the time limits. Mary Jelinek, you'll have the last word in the official, as it were, in the regular chat. Go ahead.
We know that this will end. How it will end, we don't know, but we know it will end. Every war ends with diplomacy. So we've got to cut to the diplomacy. We've got to urge our representatives to get to the table. And it can't be the United States making these decisions. The United States is the problem here in many respects. We've got to urge for a neutral third party, and it must include women, because all of the important negotiations between the United States and Russia in the past have been negotiated by women.
Very insightful and very helpful, and couldn't agree more, especially on the question of the complicity of the US. You know, so many people, this is one of the great myths in this country. Mary Condon was talking in our group about the imaginary. Part of the imaginary in the US is that somehow we come in with the white hats and we're, you know, the ones doing, but in fact, we're as complicit in the military buildup as Russia, if not more so, and of the military industrial complex economic boom here, as was pointed out. So thank you. I'm going to reluctantly close the official discussion at this point, and I'm going to turn to Diane New, who will close our time together with thanks to one and all, especially with thanks to our speakers. And then we will hear some music, and then I will make the final announcements, and we will go on our way, except those who would like, and I hope many will stay and chat. Thank you, Diane.
This 17th century icon, thanks to Mary Condon for sharing it with us, is from the old village of Starosil in West Ukraine. It represents the intercession of Our Lady of Ukraine, like Bridget of Ireland, spreading her cloak around people representing different social classes. And so we pray. And let me invite you just to extend your hands in blessing as we pray this, if you feel so called. Our Lady of Ukraine, spread your cloak of protection around the people of Ukraine and deliver them from all dangers. Hear our desperate prayers for peace and bring an end to war. Let us do justice and mercy. Amen. Ashe. May it be so today. And so our closing blessing we give to the women of Ukraine. And notice they're red and white. It's the women's singing group from Koloby Studios who are collecting folk music of the Ukrainian people.
The last
And so they're wonderful smiles, and I hope that each one of them is safe today, and their children and their children's children. So with that, we close officially, but for the announcements. And I would like to simply announce the upcoming water programs. On Monday night, the 14th, we will have the monthly water meditation at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Lillian Lewis, one of the Roman Catholic women priests. It will be focused on solitude in the vault. Then on Wednesday next week, Melanie Morrison, who is an anti-racism educator, will join us at 1 o'clock Eastern Time for the book talk. Her book, Letters from Old Screamer Mountain, in which she talks about her family's and other people in the South's anti-racism work. It's a fascinating book, written beautifully as letters to her mother, as her mother was dealing with dementia and trying to bring her mother into the conversation through these shared memories of her mother's childhood. And then there will be a liturgy on the 22nd with Diane New at 7:30 p.m. Come to the Waters of Peace on World Water Day, the 22nd of March at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, a liturgy with Diane New. And then finally, the next tea, the next of this series, will be about a month from now on Tuesday, April 5th. And we will be looking, I hope you'll have a chance to do this beforehand, we'll be talking about a movie, My Name is Polly Murray, which is a new documentary on the great African-American priest, lawyer, civil rights leader, trans person, Polly Murray. And we will be led in discussion by the Reverend Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, who is the Dean of the Episcopal Divinity School at Union Theological Seminary, and a very highly regarded womanist theologian, Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas. She will spark the conversation. So you're invited to come to that, but please try to see the movie, My Name is Polly Murray, beforehand, and I believe it's available on Amazon Prime. So join us for these and other water programs, and watch earlier ones, and yet watch this one at www.waterwomensalliance.org. We wish you from Water a lovely rest of your International Women's Day. Advise you to look in the chat. Beth Blissman, who's the Loretto person at the UN, has put a variety of very useful things. They will go out in the notes from us, but look at them in the chat. You can always copy the chat yourself. And please have a safe time and do your solidarity work with us as we try to bring about peace. Thank you, and feel free to stay on. Conversation will continue. Have a great day. Thanks again. The floor is open for those who wish to stay on and chat. The floor is open. Please feel free, especially our speakers. We're so happy that you were with us, and look forward to conversation if you have the time. If you don't, we understand. Great to have so many wonderful people together for this conversation. The floor is open. Special thanks to Laura once again. We're joined by a few extra people here. So I see Maisie Jelinek has come on board. Good to see you. Go ahead, folks. Floor is open.
Good to see you, Kitty. Have a great International Women's Day in Nicaragua. Much love.
Take care, Kitty.
Yes,
go ahead. Who, Robin?
Okay. I was just going to say hi to Kitty as well.
Oh, okay. Just
thank her
Kitty's
for telling me about this today.
Yeah, Kitty's a Loretto co-member, and always keeps us on board with what's happening in Nicaragua.
Yeah.
So
she shared last night at a prayer service that they can't demonstrate for International Women's Day in Nicaragua at this point. It's really, really hard.
Christine, give us the view from Germany. How are you? Good to see you.
Yes, well, basically I'm fine, but I'm still a reconvalescent from a patella fracture. So, well, I'm not so immobile as I was 3 months ago, but I can still just hop around a lot. So it's close. It's very close. Especially when you have, well, I don't have personal connections to the Ukraine, but I know many of the LGBTIQ community here in Munich have, because Kiev is a partner city of Munich. And there's a group here in Munich named Munich Kiev Queer. built up contacts to support Kiev with organizing CSDs and so on. And I think it were hard times, and it helped a lot that one of the what is it, Stadtrat, city, from the city council, so they were officially there, and I think that helped a lot. But now they are looking forward to this, that they get out the people who are maybe, but most probably are on detention lists of the Russian administration, so that in case the Russian administration gets the power about Ukraine, they will detain these people. And I don't know, I don't want to think about what will then happen. So they try to get them out. And I know that one of them, who is a member of the WATErea, I think that's a choir from Kiev, wonderful singers, is already in Munich since the beginning of the war. And there is, and I think it will be in English, in the America House in Munich, there's a talk between her and Konrad about the LGBTIQ situation in Ukraine just now. And I know that
sounds terrible. Look, from what I'm reading, sounds terrible.
Yeah. And then there are friends from Poland via the church, the European Forum of the LGBTIQ Christian groups, and choir connections who are now at the different borders to receive persons who are fleeing. For instance, I know of a friend in Warsaw who is a born Russian, but now carries a Polish passport, and I think a Russian passport, where he tried to get his daughter out of Russia, which is, I think, 18, something like that. So she's separate from her mother to have a safe in Poland. And that's one thing on the personal side. But when I think about the power network in the Kremlin, then because it's not Putin alone he couldn't do anything. But the oligarch and political network, I think, I don't know. And what I read about is, it was I don't know if I have still the site open. I think she's a British or where is it? Yes, Catherine Merridale is a British historian, and she knows many things about Russia, and she described how the situation, how architecture can do something with people. The Kremlin architecture is, I think, so dangerous that you deteriorate in your personality if you stay there and don't go out there. After that, when I read about that in an interview with her, I understood why Pope Francis didn't go into the Vatican buildings, but stood there where he lives now, because, well, you get very lonely there. Mm-hmm. And the third thing, which is really, really scaring, is that Ukraine has 15 nuclear plants, and 2 are already are ruled by the Russian invaders, and Chernobyl too, the sarcophague of when was it, in 86? Yeah. So it's really scary, because you don't know who listens in the Kremlin, who can do anything. And the people there can't go out anymore, because if they use the word war in their publications, they will probably be detained. So there's, I think, even the Gazeta has closed now. It's so difficult to send out news as we know that, because the people had to decide what to do and to go out. And yes.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your reflections, and we think of you and all of our European friends especially. Fear is real, and it can be stifling of everything. Rosemary Ganley, I think you're next.
I know when I speak, I'll just betray my whereabouts. And Christine, it's your voice that we should be hearing. My question is, it's bothered me for some time, and I want to write about it. This conflict has brought a lot of unanimity from most of the rest of the world, except for a couple of bad dissenters. But I find that women, who describe themselves as feminist, are badly divided. And on social issues. And I don't think we can take for granted that we're speaking for women. Certainly in Canada, that the official line is women friendly. But I'm finding other voices, not only on this issue, they're being silent on this issue, but on other issues of they're populist. And so I just wondered if any